Well, hi, Laura. You made it back?
I made it back. We had some icy spots coming back from Spearfish Canyon, but it was doable. My husband is a trooper and I said, "Will you let me drive? You seem really stressed." He's like, "No, I don't want you to drive." Okay, no problem. So we made it back safe. And I hope everyone is enjoying this beautiful sunny February day. And what brings us together today for T3 is the topic of student engagement and interaction. So you are welcome and encouraged to turn on your camera if you are able to do so, because we will have opportunities to share questions and strategies with one another around this perennial topic. And we'll also talk about what this looks like both in person and in an online environment with virtual classes, because they do show up a little bit differently in our world, but are nonetheless equally of importance. Okay. So let's take a moment to activate our own background knowledge on this topic. What are some of your challenges with student engagement and interaction? Of course, any solutions that you would have for one another on those challenges, and what approaches do you use that keep your students engaged and interactive? I could talk about this for at least an hour, probably 3, but this is meant to be discussion based and provide an opportunity for all of you to share wisdom with each other from your immediate experience in the classroom. So without further ado, I'm going to ask if anyone would be brave enough to share what some of the challenges are that they're seeing, whether it's in person or online, with keeping students engaged or keeping it interactive. What are some of the challenges that we face? And if you do not feel brave enough to share your own challenge, you can be a third-party proxy and say, well, I was talking to a friend, I was talking to another teacher, and this is something that came up. That too is.
Well, we spent 2 hours today on this very topic. So if my staff don't have any input, I would be sad.
I'm so excited to hear some of what you all talked about.
So something that I struggle with, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Something I struggle with sometimes is the content I teach is not always the most exciting thing. I was teaching a job class recently and we were talking about cleaning products because it was a job for working at housekeeping in a hotel. Practicing the word bleach, 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 bleach over again, maybe not the funnest thing in the world. And that can lose engagement when that happens. Some things I do is as much as possible to make it interactive or to gamify it. Like do a bingo game with some of the vocabulary, or, like have pictures that are numbered. You roll the dice, you say the number of the picture you roll. Just simple things to maybe make it a little less boring when it's not great content, or I should say most interesting content.
Kate, as somebody who sits in our office while other people are teaching around me, I can tell you that I can always tell when someone is playing a game in class because the noise level always goes up and you hear the students talking, laughing. So I think that's an excellent strategy.
Absolutely. Our walls are thin at LSS, so we can hear the same in the other classrooms as well.
I appreciate you sharing about that dice game, because even the clatter of the dice on the tables, that catches my attention. And the students seem to enjoy having that kind of tactile thing to do to mix things up.
Grateful. Sorry, I'm grateful to Heather for teaching me that one.
One thing I do in chat is, we have trouble getting our students to want to participate. You know, they like to just be the quiet one and, sit back and just listen. And I make sure everybody does talking, but I give a student a word in chat and they have to describe that word to the rest of the class. If it gets too dumb, and they have to come up with so they have to come up with words that have to do with that picture and where you find it and things like that. They enjoy doing that. They kind of compete with each other. I've seen a lot of classes where I team them up and they like the competition. But that's kind of what I do to keep everybody going in my class is the one thing anyway.
That's really fun, Jennifer. It's definitely gamified. It's like categories or one of those games where only that one student can see the word. Is that what I'm understanding, right? So you privately message them the word that they'll be describing to the group and they have to define it without using the word itself.
Right. They give descriptions. They have, because my students have trouble coming up with, if they can't think of something to say, I'm trying to show them there's other ways of saying it to get your point out rather than feeling really bad because they can't get that one word out. So I try to get them to say, you know, color wise or when do you use it? Why do you use this item? Is it a noun? Is it a person, place, or thing? You know, I bring in grammar, you know, kind of in the same way too. Is it an action? And just to get them to do describing, coming up with words on their own.
Thank you. I see a hand for Larry. Larry, was there something that you would like to share?
Sure. I don't know if it's a specific strategy, but one thing I try and do wherever possible is just inject humor into the class wherever I can. The other night we were having a lesson on different vegetables and fruits, and you know they had the pictures, and we were defining them or we were going over them. And you know, I get to something like an onion, and I'm like, okay, you know, what is this? Students say onion, and I say, you know, do you like onion? Yes. I say, you eat onion like this, and I would kind of like motion like bringing the onion up to my face and taking a bite out of it. And students are like, oh no, teacher. And you know, they either think I'm funny or crazy or a little bit of both, but I think it kind of keeps them paying attention because you know the students who aren't paying attention then all of a sudden they're like, well, what's going on? I want to be in on that.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I'm curious.
I think one of the challenges we face with student engagement and interaction is the fact that we bring students in at the first of every month, but the curriculum keeps going all the time. And so, you know, especially once you hit December or January, you know, you're pretty deep into the curriculum and you're bringing people in and supposedly they're at that level. You know, we've talked about, you know, some strategies recently about maybe we can supplement that or kind of move them around based on that. But you've created, even though students come and go, there's still a camaraderie, there's still a common curriculum by that point. So all these new students coming in they're already nervous and then they feel like they don't have the skills. So that's one of the things that we've been talking about.
That's
if we
really
could,
good.
yeah, if we could be like a university system or some places that do adult ed in the country where they only take them in on the quarter and then they do that curriculum for the quarter, life would be different. But we know our partners wouldn't understand that.
Yeah.
Right.
And we would lose some of the participation that we want to secure for the program year. So yeah, we want to definitely be available to those students. Diana, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, well, I was just commenting on, especially on that camaraderie. It is difficult. We have already built and scaffolded up to where we're getting ready to do more interesting activities or that sort of thing. And then a new person comes in and it's hard. As for me, I have to think about how do I keep everyone engaged. And a lot of times then I just have to differentiate my classroom. These students are ready for this new activity and they can interact with each other. So I have to teach that. And then I have to go back and do a little catch up with those new people to help get them ready to come back into that engagement. But I don't want to let some of them just sit there and hear the same thing over and over again. So yeah, keeping myself open to differentiating what I'm doing every day is very vital for me.
I'm curious if one of the things that we've been talking about, like if they come in at like an intermediate level, just whatever one of them, just say an intermediate level, that maybe, especially once it gets that second half of the year and we're going strong in the curriculum, maybe even though they tested they should go in that level, maybe we pop them down a level and just see if they're comfortable there, because that group is coming up at this, so maybe that's getting closer to where they really should be, instead of because you should be an intermediate, you go to intermediate, but really maybe not, because the lower group is getting closer to your level right now. It's one of the things we've been playing with.
Mhm. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Mhm.
So Diana, you talked about needing to differentiate on a daily basis for students. Can you speak a little bit more about how you like to do that?
Well, just for an example, we've built all the schema on the words and understanding of what they would know to participate in a conversation and ask each other questions and have some just maybe a sentence frame where they have to then come up with their own ideas for the second part of it. So we've built that up through schema. We've become comfortable with some of those words. And when a new person comes in, they really can't participate in that conversation. I'm thinking about like in my oral classes. So I set the students together. Okay, you have that conversation that you've been waiting to have. We've been working on it. And now I am then going and building those pieces for the new students so that in a couple of days or 3 or 4 days, maybe they are ready either to join into that conversation or to hold them over until we're almost done with that section. And then if they came in like on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, we're almost done with that section. Monday will be new information and we can all work on it together as a group, but just keeping that idealism of what do they need to know to be able to participate at that higher or that level where the students who have been here all week or all month have known. Right, so does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Something in that realm that we've talked about pretty extensively with our advanced level learners has been, because their attendance actually tends to be less consistent than the other levels that we teach. I've worked with a lot of teachers on that approach, a similar approach that Diana has mentioned, whereby the students that were there yesterday or the students that have been consistent end up being like a subject matter expert on the topic. And I encourage teachers to allow those students that were present and do have some level of mastery of the content to lead the review in a small group, to lead the review in pairs, so that the students that were absent have 5 minutes just to get a little bit of a sense of what they missed out on the day before. But it challenges the students that were present, because to teach something takes a greater level of mastery than to passively receive it. So it helps with that kind of multi-level component of students that missed or hadn't been for the last unit. That can be like an SME for the other learners. And SME stands for subject matter expert, in case it's an unfamiliar term.
I could add that echoed, I'm sorry. I could add a similar idea. So I had some students doing, this is like level 1 to the pretty low. We learned of new vocabulary words. We were matching the vocabulary words with the picture. And for some of the basic students that just started, that's, you know, maybe all they could do. But the ones that had done it the week prior, because we'd already done this activity, then where they were saying sentences with it. And then I have one group of 3 ladies that like to challenge themselves. They were even writing sentences to go with their word. And so there were 5 different groups happening, and all 5 were doing the activity in a different way. So, so that it was still engaging and interesting for the ones who had already done it 1 or 2 times before. So.
Well, and I think that lends itself to something that we always think about when we're talking in GED classes. I know it applies to ESL as well, but I think sometimes our GED students push the idea a little bit more, is helping students see the progress that they've made. And I think that's a key to engagement and interaction too. If a student knows that they're progressing towards their goals and they can see how far they've come since they entered our classes, I think that they're going to be more and more motivated to remain engaged and to interact with one another in class. And that's something that we stress a lot in our GED classes, is helping our students see the progress that they've made, because it can be so difficult. I actually just had this conversation with one of our students who wants to take her first final GED test and is ready to do a GED ready test. And she was talking about, you know, she said, I feel like I've come a long way. And I said, oh, I know you have. You've been coming in. We can see that progress. But, you know, even just confirming for her, yes, you have come a long way. You know so much more now than when you started with us. And I agree, we should take that GED ready test and get a quantifiable measure of that progress that we both see.
Thank you for bringing that up, Becky. I really appreciate that element of student engagement, but that I feel it also really closely relates to some of the discussions some of our programs have been having about student retention. And that seems to be one of the research-based approaches that comes up regularly, whether it be for GED or ESL learners, to have some concrete feedback so that they can really put some, have something valid that shows them that they are making gains by attending our programs. Awesome. I would like to posit a question for all of you to see whether it's with your GED students, as Becky was exemplifying, or with ESL students. What are other ways that you give concrete feedback to your learners? I'm curious about that.
I don't normally have a test or anything in writing that I can show them. But we talk about whether or not their English is comprehensible to another person, right? So we always find successes in the fact that I spoke those words and you understood exactly what I said. So that's, sometimes they don't realize how well their English is becoming in that respect. But beyond that, we set our goals and we always talk about what do we need to do to get to the next level. And when they provide English at that level, I let them know, you've just talked at the oral 3 level, right? So they can understand that they're advancing how they're putting their words together and it's comprehensible. So kind of like that is more what we do in our classroom versus a piece of paper with a test score on it.
Yeah, I think automatic, I mean, right away, if they did really well in reading, I'll comment. If you guys did really well today, give them that positive feedback, a warm fuzzy, I call it, at that time, because then they feel, because they may not feel they're doing as well as they are. And I think hearing it from teachers, they realize, well, maybe I am doing better, than I think I am. So I think just being positive in class and giving them feedback at the end of the class or even right away is what I do anyway.
Sometimes the other students pipe in and make it even better. So the other day I said to one of my students, "What did you do today?" And she told me in very complete sentences with a lot of detail what she did today. And just a month ago, when I would say, "What did you do today?" she would just say home or me work. And I said, "Wow, you just said so much English and you had so many details and I understood all of it. You're getting so much better." And the whole class said, "Yeah, wow, did you hear everything she said?" And so then they did the work for me. I didn't have to say anything else.
I also, I always am very positive with my students, like Jennifer said. And these past few weeks, we've had some things where I've had a student that came in that thought my class was too challenging and she stuck with it and she is doing excellent. I've kind of readjusted what I'm teaching and what I'm doing right now, just because I thought that maybe if we met up, because I had an influx of a lot of students this month and I started out with a really harder activity that was reading and writing, and I shouldn't have done that, but this person has stuck with the class and she's doing very, very well because we've kind of gone back to grammar basics and everybody is really benefiting from it. And I'm really proud of everybody. And I let them know that because what they're doing is not easy. I have advanced intermediate, so they have a lot on their plates right now. Most of them work. And this week I kind of started because when they do answer questions, I'm not getting full grammatical sentences. So last night I said, let's start with a subject and then link it all so we're forming full sentences. And by the end of the lesson, everybody was answering in full sentences. So I thought that was a success.
That absolutely is a success, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Awesome.
One thing that I
Anybody
really
else?
like with my English students is encouraging them to use Burlington English because that provides a lot more, I think, concrete feedback than what sometimes we have time to provide in class, and it shows them that percentage and they can keep working at it until they master each skill. I just think that's so meaningful. So I always try to show them, not always, but I take time occasionally to show them how to use it and model for them, how it works. And the ones who do really get into it, they tend to stick with it and use it a lot. And I think that's part of it, is that they get that reinforcement and it's quantified.
And they love that they can press the check button and see the green check marks and the red X's immediately. They don't have to wait. So that's nice too. Good point, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm so excited and humbled and in awe and even validated to hear these terrific adult ed, data-driven, holistic, inclusive practices, right? We're talking about, like Jeremy noted, quantifying it with that percentage, or Debbie had mentioned almost that visual, color-coded validation by sight, versus the more qualifiable, wow, I can tell you've, really improved. Are there practices or instances where you have the students self-assess or provide you feedback? And if so, how do you transact those opportunities?
John, I teach Burlington English in conjunction with workplace literacy at one of our businesses here in Mitchell. And after I finish a module in Burlington English, we since we are working with adults, we have an adult conversation about those concepts and whether they're ready to move on to the next module, or is there anything that they want me to go back and reteach, or maybe even find a different video, like especially with some of the grammar concepts and things. I've had to find additional support material to help. So we have this discussion before we move on to the next module in Burlington as a group.
One of the student self-assessment approaches that I really appreciate is in giving students a task, when I show them like a model text or what the correct grammar would be, and let them self-evaluate, I feel like they get a lot more out of that than if I were to just tell them you did this right and this wrong. But giving them a model text or an answer on the board and letting them decide where they succeeded and where they can grow. I feel like they really retain that much better, and it also makes it easier for me to correct that work as the instructor, to have them self-assess. That's a really great trick too, if you are in the practice of giving homework to students, is allowing them to correct their own homework or one another's homework by reviewing what you project or what you put on the board.
I use the chat box and have my students let me know how they felt something went or how they feel about a topic. So we do a math activity and I say, okay, let me know how you feel about that in the chat box. And as I'm getting the next activity pulled up, and then depending on the class, I do it at least once a day in each of my classes, but in my math class, I tend to do it kind of between each section of class, because it's each section of the class is very different. So you might get one part and another part might not make sense, or it might not be a good way for you to learn.
Well, I have a few examples prepared of different strategies that we've learned in our PD as a state, as well as things that may be familiar or new. And so I'll share a few of those, and then we'll have some further discussion about which of these do you most enjoy using, or is there anything that you see here that you feel like would be a good resource for the current students that you're working with. One of the tools that we have at our disposal is to leverage the warm-up of any lesson, either to activate background knowledge of the students or to review content from the previous lesson that is important to the lesson of the day. And this is really easy to do in our breakout room in Zoom or in groups of 2 or 3 in a classroom setting. And it's a very low prep introductory activity to a lesson, whereby I would have the students for 5 or 10 minutes look at the materials for today's class so that they start to get familiar with the text, with the images, and start to have some activation of background knowledge by saying a few words, depending on their level of ability and proficiency, about what we will be talking about for the day, or in another case, reviewing what we studied the day before in pairs. And that connects again to that strategy of allowing teachers to be, students to be the teachers or the SMEs in groups. If they have more mastery of the content, they can help the other student in the group just start to activate background knowledge on our topic for the day. So this is one way to keep our classes interactive and student-centric. How many of you utilize a strategy like this? Does it connect to your work with Burlington English?
I almost always in every class using that background knowledge with every lesson within a lesson. Yeah, that's a constant for me.
Excellent, David.
I also use my to my students for background knowledge to activate their for the students what they have learned.
Thank you, Naoko. Another strategy is how we blend structural and communicative approaches in our lessons. I've heard some research that 5 minutes to 7 minutes is the longest that one can attend to information being presented to them, which seems really short. So it has been really challenging for me to look at my lesson plans through the lens of definitely not going more than 10 minutes in my projection for how long I will be presenting something with structural information on grammar structure or vocabulary instruction. It gets a little bit longer when I do include the open class teacher directed practice, giving the students some structural rehearsal on the grammar that I'm presenting, or the vocabulary, the pronunciation of some of those items. But then to give students 10 to 20 minutes of pair work or group work on what was just presented. There are different time increments that we can play with, but I see so much value and student engagement in having a readiness and a preparedness for us as an instructor to flip between structural, teacher-directed, and student-centric. Learners have the driver, the wheel, and they're the ones steering the work. So this is one way to keep it really interactive, is to make sure we're shifting between. And there are times when it even is pretty beneficial to stop and have the students do a turn and talk with each other. I can liken it to when I'm speaking to a group of interpreters. I don't want to give the interpreter all this content to remember and then translate into their native language. So likewise, working with our learners, and even us as learners, teachers, we need some time to engage with that content so that we can retain it and process it and make applications to our own practice. So rather than the fire hose effect, having a blend of structural and communicative is one way that we keep our classes really engaging. Any thoughts on that? Do you have any experiences with that blend of structural and communicative work and shifting between your instruction and having the student engaged? What does that pacing look like for you?
I really like this structure because it allows me just to have a few moments, but then I get more time to observe or to listen, to monitor what they're doing. And I can extend it a little bit because I might just have pair work. But then we change partners and then we change partners again. So it keeps them engaged because they're not talking to the same person and hearing the same words all the time, but they're getting an opportunity to practice with many people. So I use this a lot.
Like Diana said, it gives you a minute when you're changing activities. So I'll, like we do something and then it's time for the students to try something out on their own, or we show a short video, and then I can get caught up with students who ask questions in the chat box, or I check in with somebody who I think might be having problems. So I like to keep it short and give myself time where I'm not needing to, where I give myself some time where I can do something like check in with the students.
I find that I don't have time to monitor the students' application of my instruction. If they just do it one time, if they do the activity one time, I typically need them to at least repeat it once with the same partner, or like Diana said, switch to another partner so that I have time to assess the students' success and errors.
Hello. I also
Hi.
feel like if you're switching like every 10 to 15 minutes, it helps with the student engagement, which comes back to the best practices too, that you really should be switching up every 20 minutes. So if you have 5 to 10 minutes, or I would say 5 to 7 minutes, like you have on the paper in front of us of presenting what you want, and then 10 to 20 minutes of pair work or group work, or even like the jigsaw, like even in my oral classes, I might say, okay, this group work on this one on this, and this one on this, and then you're going to share, right? So then all my students were really having fun this past week because I gave them all a strip story to talk about, and then they had specific questions to think about that related to previous knowledge of the week before, and then they had to share what they came up with the next group, and they didn't realize that everyone's strip story was different. So they just found that really good. And in like my lit class, for example, today we did about 20 minutes of vocab, about 20 minutes of grammar, and then the last 20 minutes was on our content for the week. So it's pretty fast paced, but they're able to catch up and they're able to, you know, stay engaged because they're not 40 minutes of grammar. That's just, if I was in class and had to spend 40 minutes of grammar, I would not be engaged either. So anyway.
And that was Heather, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Yeah, well said.
I think it's also a good reminder that you don't want the teacher voice to be the predominant voice in the classroom for long stretches of time. You know, if the teacher voice is the only voice you're hearing, not as much learning is taking place as could possibly be happening. You want those students, I think Heather said it really well, you want them engaged and you want them doing the thinking and the questioning and the talking as much as possible so that they're actively connecting with the material and not just listening or maybe, you know, faux listening to what the teacher is saying if they're going on for too long. It's a good reminder.
Thank you, Becky. Some of you might remember the Conversation Moves activity. It looks something like what you see on the screen. Sometimes the students get to choose what question they will answer, but one student might ask the question, another student answers. You ask another student to summarize what he or she or they just said, and then another student can ask a follow-up question. Another student may add to that answer. So there are cue questions. These are not the cue questions. This is just a summary. And I know our instructors have worked with this. I wonder if there are others across the state that have dipped their toes into the waters of the Conversation Moves activity that we derived a couple of years ago, and you may have seen from different presenters and materials. But this is a very, I think, engaging way to have the students talking and listening actively in the classroom. Does anyone have experience in using this type of activity? And tell us a little bit about how that works for you. Does it sound familiar to any of you? Yeah.
I have used this. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Kate.
I was just saying I have used this before in my Citizenship 3 class, which is one of my higher level classes. It works with higher level students. I would not want to try this with an oral 1 class. It is difficult, but it is a nice thing to do with the higher levels. It's nice because the students do have to actively listen. And it's great skill practice, but it is not always easy.
I guess I could second that it's a skill that we really have to teach our students, and the higher level the student, the easier it comes. With oral 1, I've mainly just done the first 3, for example, but it might be more of like a vocab review. So they say tomato, and the next person says, I eat tomatoes. And the third person might say, I like to eat tomatoes, or something like that. So they're kind of building on their skills. Let me think, that didn't come out right. Like tomato, what is this? Tomato, I eat tomatoes, or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah.
I've used it in both lower and higher levels. It just, you have to kind of modify it when you have a lower level student.
Yeah, in level 2, I do, like Heather, I do number 1, number 2, and I don't use the word summarize necessarily as we talk about what did he say, what did she say, so that they can repeat what they heard. Only one time did I have a student, and they left quickly to oral 3, who was able to ask a follow-up question. So if my students are able to ask a follow-up question, I'm sending them to Amy. That's about my level 2. But yeah, that's how I broke it down at the level 2.
I think there are a few other teachers here present who really spent the time to train their students on that 3rd bullet point by training the students almost daily to respond to the question, what did he say? What did she say? And to be able to respond, he said, she said. So this is by no means anything that you would expect a student to just be able to do off the cuff on the first try. When this was presented to us by Andrea Eckelberger, it was something that she trained them on for several weeks before they were able to do each component. And from what I've observed of other teachers, that those that have succeeded have really implemented it on a consistent basis, coaching the students how to communicate what they heard. So that student summarizes part in and of itself takes time. But I believe that there are teachers who have succeeded in implementing a few of those components, and maybe even using a square or a triangle that kind of shows whose turn it is if they're working in a small group. Has anyone used a tool like that, a square or a triangle that shows who's taking what role in a Conversation Moves activity?
I have.
I have two. And it's really nice because they can turn it and then they each practice this different roles.
Heather, what does yours look like? Is it a triangle or a square?
If it's a triangle, it's for 3 students. If it's a square, it's for 4.
Okay.
So I've used both.
And do you have the questions on that image, or do you have them on the board numbered like 1, 2, 3, and then they have a 1 or 2 or a 3, for example, pointing at them?
Right. So each corner has a different number, and then they know what role that number corresponds to for that assignment or activity.
Yeah. Thank you, Heather. Has anyone utilized these strategies in an online setting?
So yeah, I teach online with Burlington, completely online. Right now, my classes are fairly small, but when I get like 6 students in the class, I can make those breakout rooms. And yeah, I have scaffolded teaching them these things, asking each other a question. When we come back to the group, they will tell what their partner said. So I begin with that. I'll be the one asking, summarize what your partner said. And after a week or 2, I teach them what a follow-up question is. And so then I open it up to other students, just not one specific student, just the rest of the class. Does anybody have a follow-up question? And then, yeah, usually many students are jumping in, asking questions after that.
Nice. Thanks for sharing, David. Did someone else have a comment? I thought I heard someone start to speak when I asked that question.
That was me, Laura, but I was going to say something about the thing before, not the online.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, well, just about the conversation moves activity, that I have a square, but if I only have 3 students in a group, depending on how many, students are in my class, then I just double up. The same student does number 1 and number 4. And it works out because they're on the same edge of the paper. So they can do both jobs.
Nice.
And yes, I would agree that even at my level, the intermediate level, they are not, I don't have them summarize. Number 3, I just say repeat that student's answer. And then if they can say, she said she likes pizza or whatever, she said she went shopping yesterday. I'm like, huge win. Good job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, summarize is, it strikes me as one of those tier 2 words that is interdisciplinary. Are there any of our STAR teachers online right now who can speak to having taught the word summarize to students?
I am new to STAR teaching. I have not taught it yet, but it is a good word.
We go through it a lot in my classes.
Becky, would you concur that that seems like a tier 2 word?
Yes, I would agree.
Wonderful.
John had posed an interesting question and gotten some responses in the chat, Laura.
Yeah, would you like to review that for us?
Sure. John had said, regarding student engagement through lenses of vocabulary, family literacy, pop culture, mnemonics, do any of you use songs or music and lyric review as contextual supplements? And Danette and Rebecca Backus both said that that they do. They've got some fill in the blank activities that they do with that. And then Danette shared a link to a really interesting website that uses very well-known songs. Well, they're well-known to me. I don't know. I'm old. There was some Justin Bieber and some Taylor Swift in there too. And has actually pre-done worksheets that you can use if you're using music to teach, and had a lot of grammatical connections, which I thought was really interesting. And oh, watch for typos, Danette said. Apparently they're not the best in terms of proofreading.
Thank you for sharing that,
Sure.
Becky and Danette and John. I'll go through a couple of other examples just really quickly. One approach being student-centered lesson structure, very like activating background knowledge, but testing what the students already know, teaching the content that is new or can be polished for them in their skill sets, and then testing what did they retain from that instruction, giving them an extension or application activity, either for homework or at the end of class, is a way to keep the attention on the students rather than us, which I think always keeps it engaging. Having engaging homework can be kind of a trial and error process. Finding out what kinds of homework motivates our students can take some time and testing. But one thing, for example, I found is that my students really enjoyed studying spelling words. So that was a type of homework that they were really engaged in and motivated to do, giving them some time to practice homework at the very end of class for a few minutes and holding them accountable the next day, whether through a self-checking exercise or a brief check in class, helps with that engagement. Knowing the students' names and using them has been a lifesaver for many of us in the virtual world. It's nice that we can change the names on the screen so that we can call on people. There is a whole other discussion we could have about the silent phase of someone as an English learner, and they may prefer to be quiet for a while, but I tend to know my students well enough that I know they are capable and willing to speak. They just need to be invited and included. So having a name at the ready is helpful, as well as using popcorn instead of a round robin technique when having the students speak up in a group or in the open class. Because then with popcorn, they can't anticipate who's going to speak next. And you can even have the students call on someone. Again, if you have the names showing on screen, or some of our teachers have started using name tents out of a little index card or a name tag, so the students themselves know the names of their classmates. That can be helpful. TSTM approaches keep things learner-centered and engaging. Some of those approaches that we reviewed last year were the project-based learning, problem-based learning, and contextualized instruction. So having the students develop something or have a end product at the end of a unit that they have to produce keeps them engaged and on task, as well as problem-based, whereby the students have to solve a common problem to the plight of the everyday learner, or contextualized instruction in an area that is really motivating to students. It could be something like US history. We do have students over the years who are really interested in learning US history, whether it be for citizenship purposes or otherwise, or something like a job that they're interested in preparing for. So that can be helpful, as well as our multi-level management approaches keeps students engaged and interactive. And that is quite an art in itself, to group the high and low levels effectively, and having level appropriate graded tasks available to keep the higher low level students engaged, and leveraging student leadership opportunities. I've seen some beautiful examples of that in my classroom observations lately, where students, some of the teachers are really good about stepping to the side and having a student come to the board and write the board work out, asking them to answer the question instead of the teacher being that expert to answer. I've seen teachers really beautifully integrate their students in classroom leadership and sharing the answers or writing on the board. And that, of course, is more of an in-person, but there are ways that we definitely leverage multi-level management in online classes, particularly if you have those groups that are large enough to put people in breakout rooms in level appropriate mixes. Other tips of the trade, we can lead by example by starting and ending the classes on time with high value activities and not be afraid to kick it off with whoever showed up and make sure that it's a valuable time for that person. I've seen, again, really great examples from teachers of having lesson plans that are in 5 to 10 minute increments. It really keeps it moving. But if we have those distinct activities that can be completed in 5 minutes, it's a little standalone type of warm up or another kind of motivating activity that keeps people engaged. So that pace of lessons, teachers having in mind in advance that I'm going to do these shorter activities, that keeps attention. And I threw in here for fun the Goldilocks principle that we have content that's not too hard, not too easy, but just right. That will keep our students engaged as well. Okay. We have now come to the end of the hour. Any final comments on student engagement and interactivity? Did these strategies sound familiar to you? Raise your
Some
hand.
of them did, and I feel like I got some new ideas too.
Very familiar. Thank you, Laura.
Welcome. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Jeremy. Did anyone else hear something that was new that you might be able to integrate to keep the students engaged?
Something I've been thinking on for a while, or I've been thinking about this month, I just haven't had time to do it, was doing a music lesson in my Lit 4, specifically with Black musicians, because it's Black History Month. You know, I feel a lot of times when we talk about Black History Month, it's only MLK and Rosa Parks. Not that those guys aren't important, they're extremely important, but it's nice to talk about contributions of other Black Americans. So maybe we'll be listening to some Louis Armstrong next week, or maybe Billie Holiday.
I'm always impressed when learners share with me who the big pop stars are right now in their native countries. So for example, when you talk about Black History Month, there are some really cutting edge artists coming out of Congo, and they're names that I've never heard of, but it definitely honors the culture of the learner that, oh yeah, this person is pretty cutting edge. I can't say that their music is always in English. But they have their own rock stars as well.
Good to know, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, we've hit the top of the hour. Any other questions for Laura?
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you, Laura, for facilitating. Becky, Kim, everyone, excellent contributions. Well done.
Thank you everyone for the discussion and for sharing your ideas today and for the opportunity to discuss this topic.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Enjoy some warmer weather this weekend.
Right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.